So my name's Krista Mommet and I'm the Executive Officer of Woor-Dungin, and I'd like to warmly welcome everybody here today. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land upon which we're meeting, the Wurundjeri people, and pay my respects to elders past and present. So today you're joining us to launch our criminal record discrimination project fact sheets, which are over on that table. But we also thought that for people who are unfamiliar with our project, we'd start by just telling you a little bit about Woor-Dungin and the project. So Woor-Dungin is an organisation, and we work with 6 Aboriginal community-controlled organisations in Victoria. And essentially, we support those organisations to realise the goals in their own strategic plans. So we will work with an organisation on whatever issue, for however long, in what area. And our key strategy really is spending time and developing genuine relationships. And so we love our work, and it's great that we don't have to be rushed as a lot of other people that have, targets and other things, and we find that works very well. When we first get to know our organisations, we have a meeting where our staff and our committee meet with the staff and the boards of our Aboriginal community-controlled organisation partners, which I'll call ACCHOs, and we find out what some of the key issues are for those organisations. Interestingly, employment and access to employment was the #1 issue that comes up again and again for all of our partner organisations. And when we asked a little bit further about that, it was said that that having a criminal record just makes it doubly more difficult to get employment. So the fact that in Victoria we're now the only state that doesn't have a spent conviction scheme, and it's also not unlawful to discriminate against someone on the basis of their irrelevant criminal record under equal opportunity legislation, that then makes that very difficult for people who are experiencing racism and applying for employment. So that's why this project started. So the criminal record discrimination project is really looking at the impact of that legislation, particularly on Aboriginal people. What we're doing is we are interviewing Aboriginal people who have experienced discrimination, and we're writing up their experiences into case studies. Now, when we first started meeting, we found that there wasn't a general understanding about what the legislation and government policy was around certain areas. So, for example, joining a board or committee, becoming a kinship carer, getting insurance, employment, and that's where the idea for the fact sheets came about, that we realised we needed to develop a set of plain English fact sheets which outline that situation. I'm going to hand over now to Wenzel Carter. Wenzel is a member of the Criminal Record Discrimination Project Advisory Committee and an active member of Woor-Dungin to talk a little bit more about this issue and community. Thanks, Wenzel.
My name is Wenzel Carter, and I would like to welcome you all here today. I'm standing in for Michael Bell. He's got some sorry business involving a family member. I would like to commence by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land in which we are meeting, the Wurundjeri people, and pay my respects to elders past and present. I am a former Vice Chairman person of Willum Warrain, and like Michael Bell, I have been involved in this project since it started because I believe it is very important for people to be given a second chance. Getting a steady job is hard enough for Aboriginal people, but if you have a criminal record, it is even harder. As we all know, looking for that first opportunity to get a job is a pretty daunting as well. The issue is a big one for my family, as my brother was not given a second chance. He was a career criminal because he couldn't get a proper job. I think he just gave up looking for a job. And even sadder, he passed away 2 weeks ago. This is another reason why I am involved in this process. Along with 2 other community members, I launched this fact sheets at my organisation, Willum Warrain Aboriginal Gathering Place in Hastings, a few weeks ago. I think this information is very important because we need to know what the law is and what our rights are. I want to see the law changed in Victoria so everyone has a second chance. Until we do, we will not see a reduction in the number of Aboriginal people going to prison and harming themselves. I encourage you to get involved and help us do this. Please take away the invitation to get involved, written by Michael Bell, and a set of fact sheets just over here. And if you want help, speak to Krista.
Thank you, Wenzel. I'd like to start by thanking Ashurst Law Firm and Colin Biggers Paisley because they did the lion's share of research, which was the beginning of the fact sheets. I'd also like to thank the Victorian Law Foundation for funding that process. And I'd now like to hand over to Sylvia Rowley, who is the author of the fact sheets, who can tell us a little bit more about the process involved.
So, as Krista said, I'm a journalist and I've written the fact sheets with the help of dozens of other people, some of whom are in this room. And we've got 8 different fact sheets on different topics, ranging from employment to insurance to kinship care or government boards. And there's also a booklet which combines them all. And this is the general launch, but we also are having 4 separate versions launched with Woor-Dungin's partners, and these will have regional contact details for all the different Aboriginal community-controlled organisations. And Krista asked me to talk a little bit about how the fact sheets were developed. And on the face of it, it might seem like quite a simple job to summarise some legal research into plain English, but actually it turned out to be quite a lengthy process to get these right. And it's partly because there's this delicate balance between accuracy on the one hand and clarity on the other hand, because they need to be accurate, obviously, but if nobody can understand them, then there's no point really doing them in the first place. So this meant, several rounds of kind of going back and forth with lawyers until we kind of reached a truce where we were both happy with what was written. And it also turned out that even amongst some of the more expert circles that we were consulting with, that there was some confusion about certain things, like what exactly does Victoria Police release when someone does a criminal records check? So what driving offences will they release? And what circumstances will they release offences that are over 10 years old? And then there's the fact that, a lot of people think that if no conviction is recorded in their case, that they won't get a criminal record, but that's not true. And as part of our research, Edie, one of our legal project workers, came across a quote from South Australia's Attorney General, in which he said that until he became Attorney General, he didn't realise that non-convictions showed up on people's records. So if you consider the long legal career he must have had up until that point, not knowing that information. So we consulted widely with legal experts, as well as with the police, peak bodies and government departments. I'm just going to quickly list some of those who were involved. As Krista said, there's Ashurst, Colin Biggers-Paisley, also the Consumer Action Law Centre, Consumer Affairs Victoria, the Department of Health and Human Services, Dennis Nelthorpe, the Federation of Community Legal Centres, JobWatch, Justice Connect, Law Institute of Victoria, Office of the Public Advocate, Suncorp, Tawiri, Victoria Law Foundation, Victoria Legal Aid, Victoria Police, Victorian Aboriginal Childcare Agency, Victorian Community Controlled Health Organisation, Victorian Aboriginal Legal Service, and the Women's Legal Service. So you can see that, to kind of get these diverse topics into a manageable shape involved consulting quite widely. And another very important part of the process was to make sure that the people who are actually going to be reading these fact sheets would find them useful and that they were culturally appropriate. And to that end, we had cultural checking from our partners at Willum Warrain, at Winda-Mara Aboriginal Corporation, at Mallee District Aboriginal Service, and from Healesville Indigenous Community Services Association. And we also had some individuals, Vicky Clark, Cheryl Vickery, Peter Aldenhoven, Sherry Chowdhury, Tanisha Shaw, Kirsty Savage, Anne Jenkins, Dacina Fergie, and Michael Bell. And in some ways, the fact sheets are still a work in progress. We had some useful information come to us just as we were sending them to the printers, and they are also going to be on our website in electronic form. So we'll continue to update them as is necessary. And we hope that they clarify some important points for people, like what is the law around joining a government board and what does show up on a police check. But the wider aim of the project is obviously to advocate to change some of the laws in Victoria. And for that, we still really need more case studies of people who have faced discrimination. So, if you know of anybody who maybe reads the fact sheets and thinks that perhaps they have been discriminated against, or if you can think of somebody, please put them in touch with us so that we can feed those stories into our advocacy. And I'd like to give a special thanks to Stan Winford and Bronwyn Naylor, who are incredibly generous in kind of shepherding these fact sheets through to completion. And also Woor-Dungin's brilliant volunteers and staff, Elizabeth Proctor, Edie Allen, Leah Mihaildis, Lexi Russum, Lorraine Langley, and Nick Byrne. Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvia. So what we thought was going to be a very simple, easy process, it has taken a while, but we feel really proud of those sheets. I mean, that information is really good information. And when we launched at Willum Warrain, I think there must have been about 40 community members there. People took it, we got really good feedback, and we've had a number of people ring up and say, yes, I'm prepared to be interviewed, or I'm happy to pass this on to a friend or whatever. So for us, essentially, it's really important that people get the right information and then make contact, and then we interview them and write up their case study. Now, we've been very lucky to have a large number of people involved in a voluntary capacity, and one of those people is Associate Professor Bronwyn Naylor, who is the convener of our case study working group. So there are a number of people that do the interviews, but the case study working group really makes sure that those case studies are rigorous and that all of the right questions have been asked, and that when we release them publicly, there's nothing in there that people can poke holes through. We've got a barrister, David Yarrow, who will do a final legal check so that when they're made public, there's nothing defamatory in them. It's a really important role. So I'd like to hand over to Bronwyn now to talk a bit about that process and to tell you a bit about our 2 case studies that we've already written up.
Thank you, Krista. Yes, so just briefly as a little bit of background, so my name is Bronwyn Naylor and I'm an academic at Monash University. So I've been teaching at Monash in the law faculty for a long time, and I work across both law and criminology, criminal justice, I guess. And this issue of the impact of having a criminal record on people's capacity to engage in the community in a range of ways, including employment, has been an issue that I've been concerned about and researching and writing on for quite some time. And I was really delighted to be invited to assist with this project insofar as I can, because I just think this is such an important issue, and in particular, obviously, a very important issue for Aboriginal communities. So, as Krista said, I've been involved in particular in the case study working group, and also involved with some of the research and sort of doing some work with Sylvia around all the amazing work that's been done for the fact sheets as well. So in relation to the case studies, as you know, the project in a sense arose out of this recognition of the importance of advocating for change in this area in relation to the impact of criminal records. So looking at legislative change, looking at the need for spent convictions legislation, for anti-discrimination legislation in Victoria, and more broadly for change more generally, because it's just a really significant hurdle and a difficulty for many people. And I think a really powerful way of working on this project and advocating for change, as has been already explained, is by the use of case studies, by being able to tell the stories, real people's stories, about ways in which the criminal record or criminal record checking has impacted on them. So that's the project. And as you've mentioned, the fact sheets kind of arose out of that and have taken on a life of their own. And I think they're just an amazing outcome. So congratulations on those, and you'll see them there as well. But going back to the case studies, then what I will do is just very briefly outline two of the case studies, which are sort of further advanced, and as has already been indicated, the team is looking at, is hoping to find more people who are willing to participate in this part of the project. Now, we recognise that this is kind of quite, very personal information. It can be very sensitive information, and so some people are participating on an anonymous basis. And I'm only going to refer now to two of the case studies by people, involving people who have been very clear that they're willing to be named and talked about. So otherwise I would find it quite awkward to be talking about some of these matters in their lives. They've made it very clear that they're happy to have this as part of the sort of narrative, part of the advocacy campaign that's being run. So I'm just going to mention a couple of them to show you, or to indicate some of the issues that have arisen for people. And both of these case studies are still being developed and kind of analysed and written up. So the first one I want to mention involves Uncle Larry Walsh. And he particularly raised with the interview group the issue that despite many, many years of being very actively engaged as an elder in his community, despite having had no involvement with the criminal justice system since the mid-1980s, when he was being proposed for government boards, for joining boards, government boards, community boards as an Aboriginal representative, he was not being accepted. He was being rejected from those when he was being nominated. And he wasn't sure why, and we still don't know why, but he had a very strong sense that it was because of his quite old criminal record. So we were talking about that, and I think it's one of the areas that the team that Woor-Dungin is very keen to look at is the extent to which criminal history can reduce the capacity of people to actually represent and engage with and be part of their community. In the context, or in the course of having those that interview and that discussion with the volunteers who've been working with Uncle Larry, he did note that he'd been taken away from his family at the age of about 3 and placed in out-of-home care at that time. And had had a number of issues with police picking him up in the street and sort of saying, we think you've been in trouble with the police. We think there's some sort of a record there, even from the age of sort of 8 and 9. He said he had these difficulties, and he subsequently went on when he found that he was being what we would, I think, recognise as being over-policed, being picked up on a regular basis, being challenged about what he was doing, was out in the streets, why was he out there, what was he doing. He ultimately did, as he said, begin to offend, and he had a bit of a criminal history with, I think, issues around theft and other things, certainly quite a bit of driving while unlicensed and so on. But he was noticing, and he mentioned this in the interview, that the police would be commenting on the fact that he had this prior history. And there was a point that he mentioned where, when he was appearing in the magistrates' court in the mid-1980s on a driving while unlicensed offence, which, as a side point, is not an uncommon experience where people don't necessarily have identification and birth certificates and so on. So that can be an issue in itself, and he didn't, I think, get all his documentation sorted until quite recently for that purpose, but it makes it difficult to get a driving licence apart from anything else. And the magistrate commented that he had a long criminal history, and he said, you've got criminal offending, you've got criminal record going back to 1956. And he said, well, that was when I was 3 years old. So that's it, and he wasn't sure what that was about. So again, that came up in the interview, and it's something which is now we're sort of following up and trying to get a better understanding about. And what's becoming apparent is, and from quite a bit of research, we're still trying to get a clear sense of how this works. It does appear to be quite clear now that in that period, any child taken into care had an order made, a registered order made, which appeared in the same way as a criminal record. So it was a record which police held, which mentioned that that person was being held in out-of-home care. And what it meant was that it was coming up when he was being queried by the police and so on, and it was sort of showing up as some form of record. And we've checked this and sort of said, well, how could that be? Because clearly it would impact not just Uncle Larry, but all people taken into out-of-home care, certainly in that period. And it's clear that the legislation and the process was changed probably around the 1980s, following the Carney report, in terms of the way in which child protection and welfare was separated out from child correctional or justice processes. But prior to that time, it does appear that they were being dealt with together. And that's the advice we've been given from lawyers and working in that field, that would have appeared on what we would refer to as a police check or a police record. It would have said something like being held in out-of-home care or being held under a social welfare placement, but it clearly has the consequence or the risk of having ongoing impact on that person in terms of their connections with, for example, police and other agencies. So that's something we're following up now, and it does give rise to lots of really significant and disturbing consequences more broadly. The other person who's also been interviewed and agreed to be named at this point is Robbie Knight, who many of you may know. His story, and I'm not going to do justice to these stories because I'm mentioning them very briefly, but he mentions having been engaged in minor offending and finding that he couldn't then get a job he wanted. So he applied for a job with the CFA, was unsuccessful on the basis of his record, and says that because he couldn't get satisfactory employment, he ultimately ended moving into offending of various sorts, and in particular into drug-related offending. That he then went to prison for a period, came out of prison, and since then hasn't been able to engage with the CFA or with his local community in ways that he'd wanted to, again, related to that history of offending. I would note, though, and this is an area in which you may be familiar with his work, he's now a very successful artist and working in the Torch program, so he's been able to sort of develop his career and interests and his talents and skills in different directions. But it also then raised a number of questions there around eligibility requirements in terms of employment, the sort of policing, the kind of enforcement of criminal record checking in relation to volunteering, and the consequences that this can have in someone's life in a very sort of long-term way. So I guess that's probably sufficient for me. There's lots more people who are going to be speaking. So I think we can see that those case studies, those interviews, are both highlighting really important personal stories, and also what we're finding is that they're opening up even more questions for us to think about in terms of what seem to be really significant and disturbing hurdles, potential hurdles for people in this situation. So thank you. I shall hand back to Krista, I think.
Thank you, Bronwyn. So we've done 3 case studies. We've got a further 3 booked in, but we're really keen to receive and interview more people, particularly that have issues around becoming a kinship carer. That's something we'd really like to document. Our next speaker is Ian Ham, and Ian is the chairperson of Connecting Home, which is Victoria's peak body for the stolen generation. And I hand over to Ian to talk about some of our findings so far and how it impacts on community.
Thank you for that, Krista, and I would like to acknowledge that we're on the land of the Wurundjeri, and I pay my respects to their elders past and present, I've been watching too many debates today, present, and also to all other Aboriginal people with us today. And I also think it's important to acknowledge everybody who's here today, because it's kind of like after 4 o'clock during the build-up to Grand Final week, and it's a public holiday Friday. That means you're here because you want to be, not because you have to be. And I think that's really important to acknowledge, that this isn't just a project that people are doing because they have to. It's something that everybody engaged in it is doing because we want to, because it's really important. Too often we don't do the things that are important. Too often we get diverted by not insignificant things. We have work, we have other obligations, but things like this are important. And if people don't commit themselves to doing, they don't get dealt with. That's why we're in 2016 and we still have the issue of spent convictions in this state. That's why we still have the issue of unresolved business from the stolen children. I call us the stolen children. I'm a stolen child myself. And I call us children because when we use the term generations, I think we lose something in that we think of us now. I'm 52, stolen generation. I wasn't 52 when I was stolen. I was a week old. I was adopted when I was 3 weeks old. I think it's important to reflect on that. That's why I talk about the stolen children. But clearly there is a lot of unresolved business from the stolen children that still needs to be dealt with today. Connecting Home, which is the service for the stolen generations for Victoria, or one of the bodies that deals with it. There's Link Up, which is run out of VACA, and our organisation, which provides services directly to those who most need it. Those who are trying to live their lives or get on with it or get through their life. Might be a terrible way of putting it, but quite often it's the only way of putting it. Every day is a struggle. Every day is the difficulty of finding an income, whether it be the pension or a job, the difficulty of having housing, the difficulty of dealing with broken families. If you've been brought up in an environment where you've had no good parenting, you didn't have a good environment, to try and create one for your own children is extraordinarily difficult. To creating relationships with the world you live in. So Connecting Home works with people around the whole of their lives, not just counselling to deal with their issues, because that doesn't work like that. That's not how people's lives work. That's not how the real world works. So that's what we do. But clearly one of the things that has come to us is emerging issues the whole time, things that are coming up the whole time that people never conceived before. And this is one of them, the issue of spent convictions. Well, not so much convictions, but it was pointed out, registered orders, which gave the state the legal basis to keep children in custody or to have them in care. Now, until that was separated from the children's criminal system, the only crime was being born. To be born Aboriginal and taken was a crime. That's effectively what this was about. The taking of children and being able to track them and legally keep them in care because now they had a registered order against them. To know where they were, to know where they were going, to make them retrievable should they be like Larry at the ages of 8 or 9 and nick off. So the police could be notified a child has absconded. That is different, completely different from a child is missing. A child has absconded. A ward of the state who is under its custody through a criminal system has absconded. That is completely different from a child has gone missing. Now the rights or wrongs of that belong to a different generation. But what belongs to our generation is the ramifications of that Larry, for example, is experiencing. And so many others will experience too. So many others who've never been able to get a job because they have a criminal conviction, but I never did anything. I can't remember breaking the law. I've never been in trouble with the police. Why are people telling me there's something there? To try and find accommodation. Everyone who's tried to rent a house will have the same thing. Real estate agent does a police check, bang, you're out. But I haven't done anything. If you're a stolen child, you had a registered order because you were a ward of the state or held in custody, effectively. If I try and get a job, if I try and get a licence, if I do make my way in the world and become a respected member of my community and get put up to be on advisory bodies or boards, and you can't contribute any further than what you've done because of something in your background of the way we used to do business in our country, in Australia. That's why it was important to acknowledge you here today, that you're doing something about it. That somebody has decided, this group has decided, this bears investigating. We have 3 case studies, there are further 3 case studies. That, if nothing else, should pique the interest of government to say we seriously need to look at this in a much more in-depth way. We have the capacity to do it. The question is, do we have the desire to do it? And what does it throw up? Make no bones about this. This will be hard. This will be very hard. We live in a time where law and order is, for want of a better term, a very black and white thing. There's no room for the grey area of in the middle. If you have a criminal conviction, you're a criminal. If you have a record, you must have done something wrong. There will be those who don't want to listen to this because it's a law and order issue, and that's when it gets tough. But equally, there are those who want to do something about it, who is committed to doing this as you are in this room, as I am. And it's, if nothing, for no other reason, it's the sense of righting a wrong. It's a sense of obligation to ourselves and to others. It's also a sense of we have to grasp this moment. And we do have a moment now which is on our doorstep, and it's going to happen in May next year. It's 20 years since the Bringing Them Home report was tabled in the Federal Parliament, the report Sir Ronald Wilson did, which was the first report that grappled with the breadth of the stolen children. This terrible stain on our nation's history. It's 20 years since that report. We have come so far since then, we still have so far to go. The simple fact that now I can stand here as somebody who is from this community and feel that it's okay to talk about it is not a shameful thing. It's how far we have come. The simple fact that I'm here at a meeting around we need to do something about spent criminal records, period. But for me in particular in relation to the stolen children, that's how far we have to go. This is 2016. Justin Trudeau, that's how old I am, 52, Pierre Trudeau. Justin Trudeau, his son, when he was asked about why are there women in, why is the big deal about women in, or half the cabinet women, and he said it's because it's 2015. Why are we dealing with, that's how far he had come, and it's 2015. It's just the way of the world. Yet in 2016, we're still grappling with this in Australia. We have so far to go. The question for us is not where have we come in the past 20 years. The big question for us is where will we be in the next 20. In 20 years from now, according to Aboriginal life expectancy, I'll be dead. I'll be gone, I'll be buried, well, cremated and sprinkled on the Murray River, but that's for me. But I'll be gone. The legacy I want to leave for my children is that my children don't have to think that their dad may or may not have had something on his records. I'm pretty sure I didn't. Hasn't come up in any of the police checks I've had. And trust me, I've had to have police checks for the stuff that I'm involved with. But how many others have been denied the opportunities I've had to do the work that I do because they've had that against them? In 20 years from now, I don't want my children or Larry's children or our grandchildren thinking that their father or their grandfathers for some reason had a criminal record against them when in fact they did no greater crime than simply being born Aboriginal at a time when that wasn't the thing to do. That's the great challenge before us. I'm putting my personal weight for what it's worth behind this. This is critically important. And I really do thank Woor-Dungin and the Ashurst, the Law Foundation and everybody involved with this for bringing this issue to the attention that it needs, for daring to say this is still unresolved business. That's the courage and the bravery we need in these uncertain times, and certainly as we speak of treaties in Victoria at the moment, as we go forward with the Victorian government, as we talk about economic opportunity for Aboriginal people, as we talk about our next generation and our future, it is important that we do the one thing that has made the Aboriginal community get through the last 150 years. We have to make sure that we leave no one behind. We leave no outstanding business, we leave no collateral damage. There is no point of us advancing ahead if we leave somebody behind, and in this case, the stolen children and the impact that this stuff has had on them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ian, for that powerful speech. I'd now like to hand over to Chris Clark, who's the Woor-Dungin chairperson, and Lorraine Langley, our vice chair, to close. Thank you.
Thanks, Krista. It's been such a, and continues to be such a significant project and means so much to so many people here in this room and outside of this room. We thought it probably is going to take two of us to do some thank yous. So before I headed out this afternoon, some of you who have met me before would know that my partner Shorky is from Jordan, and he's been in Australia for 16 years, and in Jordan he was a lawyer. I think Jordan's legal system may be a bit more chaotic than the Australian legal system, which is one of the reasons why he's chosen to live here. And when I was telling him the work that all of you in this room have been doing, he said it's beyond comprehension. He said even in Jordan, we have a spent conviction scheme. And coming from the sort of family that he comes from, he's certainly very clear how not having that here, how it impacts on so many people, particularly Aboriginal communities. So I thought, my goodness me. So he had a message for you, but he said a whole lot of stuff in Arabic that I don't think that I can repeat, and I suspect I shouldn't repeat some of it. But it's very clear that this project has been and continues to be critical from a Woor-Dungin point of view. At the Committee of Management and the Woor-Dungin team, many of you are here, we're very clear. We have lots to do. But we are very clear that this is a key strategic priority, and we've really done our best to throw whatever resources and weight we can behind this to do as much as we possibly can. And you know, we have just huge gratitude for the work that's being done so far, and just heartfelt gratitude for the work that we know is still ahead. I'm going to just start, before I hand over to Lorraine, by just thanking a few people. I want to start by thanking our funders, the Maya Foundation, Australian Community Foundation and the Victoria Law Foundation for the resources, the funding that you've provided. Clearly, we wouldn't be here if we didn't have that funding. And as Krista mentioned Ashurst, I think it's definitely another thank you to all our pro bono partners, but in particular Ashurst. In a way, this has become a home for the Criminal Records Discrimination Project team. I mean, they provide so many things, as you can imagine: meetings, car parking, catering, of course. So Lorraine, perhaps I'll hand over to you.
Sure, thanks. Hi everybody. Yeah, I guess I just wanted to add to the thank yous. And Ian, thank you so much for that really powerful talk. I think you've captured the feelings of many of us that have been involved with this project. We know how important it is, and we definitely are not going to we're going to fight the good fight until we get that law changed. I'd like to also thank everybody else that's been involved with this project. There's just so many people to name, and Chris and I and Krista were all thinking we're going to miss somebody, so we're not going to try and name every single person. But I'd just like to reiterate Chris's comments that such a big thank you is owed to so many people. And I think I'd like to particularly mention all the very willing volunteers and pro bono supporters that support Woor-Dungin. It's part of our model. We have a very tiny paid component of our setup, but we have an amazing group of people, and I think to us, that just keeps us going, really, in many ways, but also confirms to us that the work that we're doing is important, and we thank you very much, everybody who's supported us, both in our Woor-Dungin legal team, and Sylvia ran through all those terrific people that have been supporting us back in the office, but also our advisory committee and working groups. We have a range of people that have come to support us. Bronwyn, of course, Daniel from Tawiri, Chelsea from Vels, Julie Buxton, Stan Winford from RMIT, Clara Bradley from the Law Institute, and of course Ashurst and Colin Biggers Paisley's fantastic pro bono teams that have supported us. But I think in particular, the Woor-Dungin team really values and acknowledges our Aboriginal partners that have been supporting us, both the partners in terms of the organisations that Krista mentioned we work with, but also the individuals, because those people have many of them travelled a long way to come down to Melbourne to participate, and they've shared with us a perspective that some of us at Woor-Dungin have and some of us don't in terms of lived experience. So we really appreciate all of that time, the expertise, the support, the questions and answers that we've gone through with you, and the development of the fact sheets. And I think particularly I'd like to mention a couple of people who've been involved and have really been the driving force behind this project. Michael Bell, who, as we know, sadly can't be here today. Wenzel, who has been here today. Thank you, Wenzel, for your comments as well earlier. Steve Delaney and Matt today, and many others in the community that I'm probably going to miss. Yvonne Luke, of course, but all of those people really have made it very clear to us that this is something that is important to do, and to do in partnership, which is the model that we try to do at Woor-Dungin. And I think also in terms of the fact sheets, it can be a bit misleading, I think, as Sylvia was saying, just to see some nice fact sheets there and not realise the huge amount of work that's gone into those, the research, the writing, the cultural checking. I think that all of us hope that, and we know that they will be useful, and that many people can use those and hopefully get some information that will really help them with their own journeys. But I'd just like to thank again Sylvia and everybody else at Woor-Dungin for all of that work that you put into those amazing sheets. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Lorraine. So just really to finish up, there is one person in this room who has not been thanked, which of course is Krista. So Krista, absolutely. The only thing that I could think of saying, because it just feels so big, is that Krista, in some way, you, I think, hold the vision for us all. And those of you, and I think everyone in the room knows Krista, to know that you just embrace this so strongly and take us with you on the journey. So I see you as the keeper of the vision. And will continue to be, I know, and I know how passionate you are about the work that everyone here has been doing. We know that stage 2, there's still some work to be done in stage 2. The fact sheets has been a huge component of stage 2. We're really pleased with how far the team's come with the case studies. Still more to be done, but we've come a long way. There's been a lot of work to get to this place. And we know that the research underpinning the case studies and the ongoing work will continue. So as we complete stage 2 and move on towards stage 3, I want to unashamedly say we will continue to ask and seek resources and support that really will continue to support the amazing work that's being done. So thank you so much for being here, everyone, and please stay for drinks and nibbles and ongoing conversations with everyone in the room. Thank you.